Hello and welcome to this lecture on pseudoscience. In this lecture, we're going to identify what pseudoscience is and how to identify scams that use pseudoscience to try to convince you to take certain products and also your money. So right now on the right-hand side, you can see a small guide that shows science versus pseudoscience, and it's a nice list, and you can always review this on your own, but a couple things I'll point out to is, for example, with science, it embraces criticism, while pseudoscience is hostile to criticism. So in science, we love to be corrected. If we don't have it right, we want to correct that sort of idea. We also make sure that any claim we make is conservative, tentative. We move slowly, pace by place, where pseudoscience is grandiose in its claims. And this list goes on, but let's go ahead and take a few minutes here and define what pseudoscience is. So what is pseudoscience? Pseudoscience, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is a system of theories, assumptions, and methods erroneously regarded as science. The thing with pseudoscience is they're trying to convince you it is science and it's using the scientific method. As we're learning, the scientific method is something concrete. It's something we use in a procedural way to determine what happens in the natural world by observations and things that can be measured. Pseudoscience pretends to use this approach, but in fact, skips corners or chases ideas that we can't actually do with the scientific method and then presents it as something that went through the scientific method. The problem with pseudoscience is it can be very dangerous, okay? It can be used to try to convince people to do certain things that they're saying is scientifically proven, but really it's based on opinions and beliefs and not on reliable data. Now the problem with this obviously is that it can try to sell you a product that has no effect that it's saying that it can do. We'll talk about that. It can convince you to try to use something that to actually make you avoid use something that could be a life-saving device, for example, vaccines. We'll talk about that. And it can also be used to spread propaganda. So here's three good examples for you of pseudoscience. The first one would be the idea that vaccines cause autism. There was a paper that came out at this point about 20 years ago, and it tried to correlate that vaccines and taking, for example, the MMR, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, could cause autism in children. In reality, there was no causation or correlation to this claim. The idea that basically the vaccine was causing the autism was not backed up. Many scientists, after this first report came out, embraced the criticism, used the scientific method, and said this approach is actually wrong. There is no correlation between vaccines and autism. And in reality, if we look at the paper itself, it had a lot of problems with it that we have a problem with, and we would say is pseudoscience. First of all, it had a very small sample size. Only 12 children were enrolled in the study. In reality, for a study that makes this sort of claim, you would expect 1,000 or more participants to be in the study. In addition, those children had signs of autism before they even received vaccines. And the main author, the principal author of the study, in fact, had a substantial conflict of interest. He was currently developing an alternative vaccine to sell at a profit for people instead of letting them take the MMR. So together we can see how this is a good pseudoscience example. At the same time, look at the data on the right-hand side. We can see here two different charts that show the difference in vaccination rates for polio and also mumps, which is the bottom chart. In both these cases, when vaccines were developed and introduced into society and the population, the cases of polio and the cases of mumps dropped drastically. And when I say drastically, down to 0%. Right? These vaccines work. They're effective and they're saving lives. And again, it goes back to the idea of pseudoscience can sometimes try to convince you to take a life-saving medication or an approach and actually make you disregard it. So you have to be careful with things that are trying to present themselves as science and they're not. Another good example of pseudoscience would be ghost hunting, an electronic voice phenomenon, or EVP. In this case, ghost hunting and ghosts in general is part of the supernatural environment. There's nothing that says they're real according to science, and science itself can never do anything to distinguish the natural world and the supernatural world. Science never focuses on that. Scientists, we focus on what we can see, what's natural, what can be observed, and what can be measured. We have nothing to say with the supernatural phenomenon. We can't go after that. But with ghost hunting, they try to take that approach. Again, they're trying to show correlation without causation. So for example, even with EVP, they listen to sounds and then they try to say, that sounds like this voice, or that sounds like they might be saying something. In reality, it's just the mind trying to make something out of a puzzle of a sound and sometimes misinterpreting it as a voice. The last example I'll give you here is alkaline water. So alkaline water is a very common thing that people take nowadays. It's prevalent. And the reason they say it is because that they sell it is because they say it's a cure for an acidic body. In reality, there's no evidence to suggest this. And the body itself is not acidic. Your pH is above a pH of 7. It's actually slightly alkaline already. And the things that you have inside your bodies, we'll talk about even in this course, in the gastrointestinal tract, regulate the pH of every single thing you consume. So even if you take in a product that's acidic, you turn it alkaline by the time it gets to your small intestine. So again, there's no evidence that this is actually happening with alkaline water, but they're selling you alkaline water for a price, and they're making a profit off of it. So how do we determine if something is a health scam or pseudoscience when they're trying to sell us a product? Well, there's things to watch out for. For example, if it's a quick fix, you take this and you're going to be better in a few months, it's going to make you just like that better. If it sounds too good to be true, if it's a cure-all, it'll fix this and it'll fix that and it'll fix this and everything that you've got possibly wrong with you and your brother and your sister and your uncle and your aunt and your mom, in reality, medications are usually targeted to deal with one thing or maybe two things at most. They can't fix everything for you. It sells the product at the same time. So a lot of times with science, we're talking about, for example, nutrition, good nutrition and also good, for example, diets that we will present you in this course. Those aren't asking for your money to follow them. But a lot of the pseudoscience claims, a lot of the fad diets, etc., they will be asking for your money to buy certain products or books, etc., to sell them. They also suggest, for example, disbelief in the medical community. And what that idea is basically saying, and we've seen this when we go to all of our social media, it says, dentists hate, us for this one trick. All that sort of idea that, trying to dispel disbelief within the medical community that somehow the scientists and the medical professionals are out to get you and your money, and they're very upset if you figure this one thing out. It's never like that. This is a pseudoscience approach where they're trying to pit the science and the medical professional, the medical field, against what they're trying to actually sell you. So let's actually take a look at one product that we know is following pseudoscience, and this would be bee pollen, or as I like to call it, beeswax, which is an old way that we used to say when something was false. So the top article here we're going to look at in a second is from Mercola, and this company is trying to sell you bee pollen. So let's take a look at that, and after we take a look at that, we're going to look at the FDA and what they say about bee pollen and the problems associated with it if you do take it. Okay, so here we are on the Mercola website. Mercola is a company that sells supplements, and they're talking about bee pollen as a superfood. As a scientist, I can tell you right now from the bat, superfood is not a real word. There's no definition for it. It's one of these words that people like to use when they try to say it's good or bad food. Okay, so these sort of ideas are good or bad products. So we have to be careful when people are trying to put things into categories like this. They explain to you what pollen is from their perspective. Some of this is going to be true, and then there's going to be things embellished probably in here that also aren't true, but it's buying you in and making you think they're following science. But now look at this list. If you take bee pollen, it's going to build new blood, it's going to regulate your intestines, it's going to overcome any sort of intellectual disabilities in children, it's going to prevent you from getting flu, and in fact, one of the things that came out during COVID-19 is a lot of bee pollen was trying to say that it will combat and help you if you get COVID-19. That's been disproven as well. So if you notice here, these are lots of different, it reduces cravings and addiction. So in other words, it's going to help you lose weight. So this is a cure-all. So again, they're taking bee pollen by itself and saying, no matter what you've got going on with you, it's got anti-cancer qualities. Not true, by the way. None of this is true. But they're trying to sell it to you with the idea, this is a cure-all no matter what you've got going wrong for you. Look at medical miracles. These sort of words scream to a scientist in the medical community. Infertility problems, it's going to treat with allergies. It does everything. Look at all these things it does for you as a cure-all. And of course, if you do want to buy this product, though, at the same time, it's going to cost you quite a bit of money. Now, what's the problem with it? Let's go see what the FDA says about bee pollen. So the problem is, first of all, bee pollen, when you buy one of these supplements, they're not well regulated. And there's many products like this out here. Some of them contain hidden drug ingredients. But the other thing that sometimes happens with bee pollen, the thing is bee pollen isn't one single ingredient. It's whatever the bees got when they were out doing their job, which is collecting the pollen. So you're not just getting bee pollen from one bee or from one flower. You're getting it from whatever they collected out there. And if there's carcinogens, if there was, for example, sprays like pesticides on the flowers they collected it from, you're consuming all of that in a concentrated form by taking the bee pollen. Again, all the claims they make, if we take a look at the dietary supplement fact sheets, and we look at bee pollen as well, so this is through ODS, which is another good place to look, and we look at bee pollen and we click there, it takes us to Medline Plus, and that's a .gov site. This is a good site to look at too. And it shows you, if you go down through here and you look at bee pollen, it will show you that the different ideas, like for athletic performance, doesn't improve that. It also talks about the contraindications. If you take warfarin, which is a blood thinner, it might actually make it more agonistic, which means you could even have increased bruising and bleeding. Very, very bad stuff. So in fact, taking bee pollen is a risk. It's not that it's a benefit. There could actually be a risk associated with it. So to wrap up for this lecture, then, what have we learned? Well, we've learned to be careful with pseudoscience. The pseudoscience is trying to tout itself as real science when in reality, most times they're just trying to sell you a product. Where can we instead find good nutrition advice? We can get it from our physicians, we can get it from RDs, and there's even different websites for the registered dietitians to go to find this information. FDA.gov is a good source, and also the ODS or Office of Dietary Supplements are good places to go to find out more information about what pseudoscience is versus science and those different ideas and concepts. So that's going to wrap us up for this lecture. I hope you found this interesting. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.